May 2nd, 1863, 9:15 in the evening, the Wilderness, Virginia. The woods are black, not the comfortable dark of a clear night with stars and a moon and the sounds of crickets. This is a different kind of black. The tangled second-growth oak and pine of the Virginia wilderness swallows light the way deep water swallows stone. The smoke from 8 hours of battle hangs in the branches like a second canopy. It smells of sulfur and pine sap and blood. The roads are churned to soup. Somewhere to the east, the campfires of the Union Army glitter through the trees. Somewhere to the west, 100,000 Confederate soldiers are trying to sleep in the mud, listening to the groaning of the wounded. And on a narrow lane called the Mountain Road, 3 riders are returning from a night reconnaissance. The man in the center rides a little sorrel horse named Little Sorrel. He is tall in the saddle. He wears a sun-faded coat and a cadet cap pulled low over his eyes. He is the most feared general in the Confederate Army. He is the man who gave the order that broke the Union right flank today with the most audacious flanking march in the history of American warfare. He marched 28,000 men 15 miles through dense forest in total secrecy around the entire Union Army and struck like a thunderbolt at dusk. He shattered 3 full Union corps before they knew he was coming. He drove them out of their positions in a screaming panic. He came within hours of cutting off the entire Army of the Potomac from its supply lines. He is Stonewall Jackson, and the battle is not finished. That is why he is out here in the dark. He is looking for a road that will let him get between the Union Army and the Rappahannock River. He intends to complete the destruction tonight. He does not sleep when there is work to do. He does not celebrate victories. He finishes them. He turns his horse back toward the Confederate lines. The sound of the rifle fire comes from his own side. It comes in a volley, then another. The road explodes in noise and muzzle flash. The men in the 18th North Carolina Infantry Regiment hear hoofbeats in the dark. They hear the sound of a group of riders coming toward them from the direction of the enemy. Their officer shouts the order, "Fire." What happens in the next 4 seconds will end the Confederacy's best chance of winning the Civil War. Jackson is hit 3 times. 2 balls strike his left arm. 1 strikes his right hand. He sags in the saddle. His horse bolts toward the Union lines. An aide grabs the bridle. Jackson slumps. His staff pulls him from the horse and carries him into the trees. He is conscious. He is calm. He says nothing dramatic. He says to General A.P. Hill, who rushes to his side, that they should say nothing to the troops about what has happened. He does not want the men to know. He is carried toward the rear on a stretcher. At one point, the stretcher bearers are struck by Union artillery and drop him, and he falls hard onto his wounded left arm onto the ground. He does not cry out. He will have the arm amputated before morning. 8 miles away, on the other side of the burning battlefield, a courier arrives at the tent of General Robert E. Lee. This is the scene that changes everything. Not the battle, not the flanking march, not the 3 rifle balls fired in a darkness so complete that men were shooting at shadows. This moment, this tent, this courier handing a folded piece of paper to the most composed general in the Confederacy and watching the composure crack. To understand what Lee feels when he reads that note, you have to understand what Jackson was to him, not just as a general, as a mechanism, as the only instrument in his possession that was capable of doing what he needed done. Lee was a chess player operating with missing pieces. The Confederacy was always outnumbered, always outgunned, always outsupplied. The only way to survive was to move faster than the enemy, to strike before the enemy could react, to create tactical situations so complex and violent that superior numbers became a liability rather than an advantage. But speed requires a specific kind of man to execute it. Not just a brave man, not just an experienced man. A man who can receive the idea of an order, not the letter of it, and carry it out with a ferocity and a stamina that nobody else in the army could match. That man was Thomas Jonathan Jackson. They had met 2 years before this night. Jackson was already a legend from the First Battle of Bull Run, where he earned his nickname by holding his brigade like a stone wall while the rest of the Confederate line bent and buckled under Union pressure. But the nickname tells only half the story. The other half is the Valley Campaign of 1862, where Jackson took a small force through the Shenandoah Valley and destroyed the logic of 3 separate Union armies in 5 weeks. He moved his men 30 miles a day on foot. He appeared where nobody expected him, struck before anyone could respond, and vanished back into the mountains while Union generals were still writing dispatches trying to explain where he had gone. Lincoln was furious. The whole Union command structure was furious. They couldn't catch him because they couldn't believe any army could move that fast on foot through that terrain in that weather. But they could, because Jackson did not allow them to stop. He drove them through mud and rain and heat. He allowed no straggling. He held religious services on Sunday mornings and then marched the men until their feet bled on Sunday afternoons. When Lee took command of the Army of Northern Virginia in June of 1862, the first thing he did was summon Jackson, and the partnership that formed was unlike anything else in that war. It was not a friendship exactly. The two men were in many ways opposites. Lee was urbane, precise, sociable, a man comfortable in the company of politicians and society. Jackson was strange. He sucked on lemons. He kept his left hand raised above his head for hours because he believed one arm was heavier than the other and he needed to keep the blood balanced. He prayed constantly, attributed every victory to God's providence, and ate plain food standing up because he feared his digestion would suffer if he sat down to meals. But in the field, they were a single instrument. Lee would see the geometry of a situation. He would understand the weakness in the enemy line, and he would tell Jackson, not explain it, not write a detailed order with contingencies and fallback positions. Just tell him the intention and trust that Jackson's mind, working at a speed nobody else could match, would find the path to execute it. At Second Bull Run, Jackson marched 54 miles in 2 days to strike the Union supply depot at Manassas before Pope knew he was moving. At Antietam, Jackson's corps arrived on the field from Harper's Ferry after a forced march and plugged the gap in Lee's line at the exact moment the Confederate left was collapsing. At Fredericksburg, it was Jackson who held the Confederate right against the Union assault with a composure so total that soldiers on both sides remarked on it afterward. And now, tonight, at Chancellorsville, Jackson had just executed the most breathtaking single day of offensive maneuver the Western Hemisphere had ever seen. He had taken the idea in Lee's head, the idea of a 15-mile flank march through dense forest to strike an unsuspecting enemy flank, and turned it into reality with the complete and absolute conviction of a man who had no doubt that he would succeed. The courier's note says that Jackson has been wounded, that his left arm has been amputated, that he is alive, but the prognosis is uncertain. Lee holds the note. He is still. He is the marble man, the composed Virginia gentleman. He reads the note a second time, and then he does something his staff had almost never seen. His voice breaks. He speaks, and what comes out is not the measured language of a commanding general. It is the voice of a man who is looking at a tear in the fabric of everything he has built and understanding in one terrible instant what it means. He says quietly to his aide, Colonel Charles Marshall, "Any victory is dearly bought which deprives us of the services of General Jackson, even for a short time. But that is the public statement, the thing spoken for the record. What Marshall and others present would remember privately, the detail that appears in letters and diaries rather than official accounts, is more devastating." Lee turns away from the others. He does not want them to see his face. He says in a voice that is barely above a whisper, "He has lost his left arm, but I have lost my right. He has lost his right arm." The operation sits there on the desk all night. The Union Army is still in the field. The battle is still unfinished. Jackson's corps needs a commander. Lee does not sleep. He sits with the maps and he works and he makes the decisions that need to be made and he sends the orders that need to be sent. By the time dawn comes, on May 3rd, the Army of Northern Virginia has driven General Hooker's army back across the Rappahannock River in what will be celebrated across the Confederacy as Lee's greatest victory. The newspapers call it Lee's masterpiece. The soldier on the street in Richmond calls it a miracle. The Confederate Congress sends a formal resolution of thanks to the Army and its commander. The dispatches coming into Jefferson Davis's office are full of the language of triumph. But Lee writes to Davis on the day the victory is secured in language that is extraordinary for its absence of triumph. He writes about Jackson's condition. He writes about the wound. He calls the battle a success, yes, and gives thanks for the result. But then he writes something that cuts straight through the pageantry of victory to the thing underneath. He writes, "At the moment of our greatest success, we were deprived of the services of that great and good soldier who has been associated with me in all our movements." At the moment of our greatest success, he is saying it plainly. This victory, the greatest victory he has ever won, is already contaminated by what it has cost. He knows. He knew it the night the courier brought the note. He knows it with a certainty that no amount of captured artillery or routed enemy divisions can change. Jackson lives for 8 days. He develops pneumonia. It is 1863, and pneumonia is a death sentence, and especially for a man whose body has already been through the shock of 3 bullet wounds and an amputation. He is moved to a small house at Guinea Station to rest. Lee sends messages. He sends a note that says, "Give General Jackson my affectionate regards, and tell him to make haste and get well, and come back to me as soon as he can. Come back to me. The language is not the language of a commander speaking to a subordinate. It is closer to something else. It is the language of a man who understands, with a precision that is almost mathematical, that a part of the machinery that has kept him alive in this war is failing. There is a moment during those 8 days that the historians tend to include and then move past too quickly. Jackson is delirious with the fever. He is in and out of consciousness. He is fighting the last battle his mind has available to him, replaying the movements and orders of the campaigns in the landscape of his fever dream. He shouts orders. He calls for A.P. Hill. He asks about troop dispositions. His wife sits beside him and holds his hand, and he does not always recognize her. But in a moment of clarity, when the doctor tells him that he will not recover, that it is a question of hours, Jackson becomes completely still. He does not weep. He does not protest. He listens to the diagnosis with the same calm with which he listened to the sound of artillery, and then he says, "It is all right. It is all right. It is the Lord's day. My wish is fulfilled. I have always desired to die on the Sabbath." He dies on Sunday, May 10th, 1863. It is in the aftermath, in the weeks after the body is taken to Lexington, and the eulogies are delivered, and the army goes into its encampments along the Rappahannock, that the reality of what has been lost begins to press down on Robert E. Lee with a weight that does not lift. He needs a new structure for the army. He reorganizes from 2 corps into 3. He promotes Richard Ewell to command what had been Jackson's corps. He promotes A.P. Hill to command the new 3rd Corps. He writes orders. He holds councils. He goes through the mechanics of command with his characteristic precision. And every single day he is working without the instrument that made the precision matter. Ewell is competent. He is brave. He has lost a leg and still rides to battle with a wooden replacement, and nobody questions his courage. But Ewell is not Jackson. Ewell asks for clarification where Jackson demanded clarity. Ewell sends messages back requesting confirmation of intent. Ewell, when given the order to attack a position if practicable, asks what practicable means. Jackson never asked what practicable meant. Jackson looked at the position, calculated the variables, and either took it or sent word that it was impossible, and why. The difference seems administrative. It seems like a question of personal style, of management, of communication. It is not. It is the difference between an army that can compress 10 decisions into 1 order and an army that needs 10 orders to make 1 decision. In a battle where the first hour determines everything, that difference is not a management problem. It is a casualty rate. 2 months after Chancellorsville, Lee takes that army into Pennsylvania. He has promoted the wrong men to the wrong positions through no fault of his own, because there are no right men available to fill the positions the dead and wounded have vacated. He gives Ewell the order to take Cemetery Hill on the evening of July 1st, 1863, if practicable. Ewell decides it is not practicable and halts. Jackson would have taken that hill before the sun went down. Everyone who was there knew it. The soldiers knew it, the staff officers knew it, the historians would know it, and Lee knew it in the moment he received word that Ewell had halted, though he said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say about what was gone. Gettysburg unfolds over the next 2 days in a sequence of near misses and accumulated failures that cannot be traced to any single mistake by any single person, but which all share a common ancestor. Every moment when an order is delayed, when a subordinate hesitates, when an attack goes in an hour late or a division ends up in the wrong position, every one of those moments is the ghost of Stonewall Jackson making itself felt by its absence. Lee stands on Seminary Ridge on the afternoon of July 3rd and watches 15,000 men walk across a mile of open ground into the concentrated fire of an army that has had 3 days to prepare for exactly this attack. And he has ordered it because he has run out of other options, and the only other option was to stand still and starve in Pennsylvania, and standing still was never in his nature, and he is missing the man who, given the same situation, would have found the third option that nobody else could see. There is a letter Lee writes to Jefferson Davis on August 8, 1863, about 5 weeks after Gettysburg. It is the letter in which he offers his resignation. He cites his health, he cites his age. He says Davis should find a younger, more capable man to command the army. It is formal and measured and completely correct in tone. But buried inside it is a sentence that historians read in different ways, though what it says is not ambiguous if you have followed the story to its proper beginning. He writes that he sensed the loss of Jackson as irreparable throughout the Pennsylvania campaign. Not significant, not serious, irreparable. A word that does not mean difficult to overcome. A word that means cannot be undone. Lee knew it before Gettysburg. He knew it before the Shenandoah Valley, in the summer of 1863 when Ewell fumbled the campaign there. He knew it on the night of May 2, 1863, when he read the courier's note by candlelight, and his voice broke, and he said the words that contained the whole truth of what was coming. "I have lost my right arm." The right arm does not grow back. The Confederate Army that fought the war after Chancellorsville was a different organism from the one that fought it before, still brave, still capable of moments of tactical brilliance, still sustained by the loyalty of men who would follow Lee into any fire, but operating from that night forward with a gap in its command structure that could not be filled because the gap was not a position, it was a person. A specific, irreplaceable, frankly strange person who sucked on lemons and raised his left hand above his head and drove men 30 miles a day in the rain without apology or explanation. When Lee finally surrendered at Appomattox in April of 1865, the reasons were the ones the historians enumerate: Grant's overwhelming numbers, Sherman's march through the Confederate heartland, the strangulation of the blockade, the collapse of the Confederate railroad network, the exhaustion of Southern manpower after 4 years of a war that demanded more than the South had. All of these are true and correct. But the deeper reason, the reason beneath the reasons, was set in motion on a dark road in the Virginia wilderness on a night in May 1863, when a volley of rifle fire from friendly troops tore through a group of riders returning from a reconnaissance, and 3 bullets found a man on a small sorrel horse, and the Confederacy's best chance of survival bled out in the dirt. Lee won his greatest victory that week. He also lost the war. The Battle of Chancellorsville is taught as a triumph of audacity. 2 generals communicating with such perfect understanding that they divided their army in the face of a superior enemy, executed a flank march of staggering ambition, and destroyed the confidence of a Union army that outnumbered them 2 to 1. What is less often said, because it requires sitting with an uncomfortable truth about the nature of irreplaceable genius, is this: Lee won that battle by using Jackson to his absolute limit. He sent him on the flank march with no reinforcements and no support. He trusted Jackson to do what only Jackson could do, and Jackson did it, and was shot by his own men in the dark, and died 8 days later of pneumonia. Genius, when it is used to its absolute limit, breaks. Not always, not inevitably, but sometimes. And when it breaks, the thing it was holding up breaks with it. Lee stood in his tent that night and understood this. He let himself understand it for just long enough to say the words to Charles Marshall in a voice that was barely a whisper. And then he put the understanding away, because the battle was still going, and there were orders to write, and the army needed its general to be the marble man, not the man with the broken voice in the candlelight. He was both that night. He was both for the rest of the war. That is what real command costs. Not just the victories, not just the defeats. The knowledge, carried alone, that the thing you depended on most is gone, that you will keep fighting anyway, because there is no other choice, and because the men who follow you deserve a general who does not flinch where they can see him flinch. Lee never flinched where they could see him. He just never won Chancellorsville again.